was 2015, if I remember correctly. And so here we are.
Wonderful. Good to have you both with us today. So the format of the panel questions is I'm just going to alternate between the two of you. And my first question is for Travis. Tell us about SightBox and what led you to its creation.
Sure. So I'll give you a little bit of background. My family, actually my dad and my sister are both optometrists. I grew up in that world, obviously. I joke frequently that I spent all of my family vacations going to optometry conventions. So that was my childhood. So I've been around that space for a very long time. I built a web development business back in '97 when the internet was still a fad, and continued to grow that, and then that evolved into getting involved in the eye care space. And you were presented with opportunities throughout life, and some of them you latch onto, and I latched onto that space and started learning a little bit more about it and about the tech behind and the struggles with people getting healthcare and getting eye care in particular, and getting contact lenses ended up being a big trouble spot for people because of the logistics involved in all of the components that lead to you getting a prescription for contact lenses. Those of you who have contacts, you know that it's not a simple process. There's getting the lenses is making an appointment, then you have to go to that appointment. The doctor then gives you some trial lenses. You trial those for a period. Those don't work. They give you more trial lenses. And it's kind of a bumpy process. And then you have to deal with the health insurance side of it or vision care side of it. And that is complicated and never as clear as it sounds. And so it just makes it difficult. And that's what we recognized over years of doing things in this space. And so SightBox evolved out of that. So initially, I was building web applications for optometry practices to be able to sell direct to their patients, and slowly was realizing that the problem was a lot bigger than that, and that wasn't going to solve it. And so I decided to create a more fully encompassed solution, which allowed people to sign up with SightBox. We then would handle the eye exam, the scheduling, the managing of the trial lenses, and that process all the way to getting the prescription, and then shipping the lenses on a regular basis, a regular cadence throughout the year, to make sure that they never ran out. And then at the end of the year, we would call back and start the process all over again. So it became more of a concierge service around eye care, and that's why it was working. People wanted support.
Well, thank you for that background. My next question is for Angela. In 2011, you co-founded Portland Seed Fund, and you began investing out of your first fund with the goal of helping to spur the growth of Portland's emerging tech sector. And you proved that a small-scale, early-stage funding is a viable way of doing so. What is the most important thing you look for when investing in an early-stage digital health company?
Well, thanks for that question. In our first fund, we invested in 36 companies, and not one of them was a digital health company. So when you look back at this decade, let's tell that story a little bit. The most important thing about a digital health company is the same as any company that we would invest in. While our sectors have evolved really opportunistically, we have stayed completely true to this mantra of capital efficiency with high growth potential. So back in 2011, digital health was not the thing it is becoming. So we were primarily investing at that point in what we would call B2B software as a service, which could have been health related. It just so happened that the universe of opportunities here in that time period didn't really bubble up a great company or choice in that realm. So by the time we got to our second fund, which is the fund that we invested, from which we invested in SightBox, we actually saw a number of great digital health companies. So what made them great? Number one, there was something about them that was capital efficient, okay? Now, it may not have been as capital efficient as 2 people in a garage and a dog and a laptop. It may have been slightly more capital intensive, but the point was commensurate with the scale and the uptake it could get, it was inherently efficient. And that's really important when you're investing in a small venture capital deprived state like Oregon. And I know, I'm a cheerleader for Oregon, and that's not a cut against us. It's a simple fact. We lack large quantities of large volume venture capital, particularly as it relates to deeper science and tech companies. So companies that we nurture here, they have to be good enough at what they do to get on an airplane and compete head to head with other more challenging markets, the Stanford ecosystem, Johns Hopkins, Research Triangle, Nashville, Boston, for funding. So honestly, we don't do anyone a service by just sprinkling a little lucky fairy dust on a few companies if they aren't going to have the metal to do it. So where we are today in 2020, now investing out of our 3rd fund, we're invested in quite a few digital health companies, and we're seeing a lot. They continue to be great opportunities, and we continue to look. What we need, some form of capital efficiency, whether that is, when I say capital, I do mean investor capital. So ability to leverage the grant ecosystem, both state and federal, is super important. We look for that. Most private investors do not like to fund science projects. They want to know it's a proven thing before they kind of throw the gas on the engine and let it speed up. The second is something differentiated or a compelling founder angle. Travis, if he was just a guy who had taught himself some web skills and had an idea around contact lenses, we'd be not interested. What made us interested in Travis is that he was, at his dad's knee at all these optometry conventions, from the time he was a boy, and he had very deep and specific insights into the industry, but also a fresh take on them because he himself was not an optometrist. So that kind of mashup of vertical access to something special, and then a fresh take on that is, to me at least, what all companies should look for. That plus capital efficiency, so you're not asking for private investor funds until you've absolutely been able to demonstrate proof and traction. That's the full meal deal right there.
All right, great. Thank you for that. So Travis, what was your biggest challenge when looking for funding in the early stages of SightBox?
Yeah, that is a great question, because that is probably the hardest part of a startup, is that beginning stage when you're trying to prove that your idea has, market adoption that's going to happen if you just had a little money, right? That's always the argument. If I just had a little money, this thing would just go. Well, it's kind of a catch-22, because you have to prove that in order to get the money. Investors aren't going to invest in an idea you have in your head. They need to see that you know how to execute this, that you understand. And it took me a little while to understand how that relationship needed to evolve. Fortunately, I had a friend in San Francisco who had already sold a company and had been through the process, and he was there and able to kind of guide me a little. So I think, looking for mentors that can help you understand what the milestones are that you need to put in place in order to build some trust with investors. And, Portland Seed Fund didn't fund us the first time we met. Angela, they said, it sounds great. We love the idea. I remember, Angela, you even said your son wears them. He wears contacts and he's in college, and you understood the concept and why it would be of value. But we still had to get some customers to start paying for the service so that we could show that there was a market out there. And so that was an important step.
Yeah, great. So Angela, you commented on this a little bit, or maybe you could expand upon it a little bit. What about SightBox caught the attention of you and Portland Seed Fund?
Well, this is sort of a fun story that Jim, my partner, who co-founded Portland Seed Fund with me, tells a lot. So I'll copy his story. he will tell people that, you know, he wasn't really into it. I had to argue with him to show the opportunity on this one. And here's, I think, an important thing for entrepreneurs and investors to know. Investors will do either a little or a lot of due diligence on a company before they invest. And I'll tell you what, there's always reasons not to do a deal. It's the dumbest thing you could do in the world is throw your money out into this startup and then wait that it maybe comes back or maybe not, 10, 15 years sometimes, okay? It doesn't sound that smart. So there's always reasons not to do a deal. And I think the challenge of being a good investor is learning what risks really matter and what risks are, you know, can be mitigated. And for the existence of what risks is there actually opportunity. Investors only make money if they do the deal and they do the non-obvious. You know, if a month ago or 2 months ago, whatever, before the COVID situation, it would have been a no-brainer to put money into, you know, Apple or whatever. Well, yeah, that's very different than the people who were investing in Apple when it was not obvious. So investors have to always balance safety with acceptable risk. So even within partnerships, sometimes there's disagreement. And, you know, we were, along with Rogue Venture Partners, I believe, Travis, correct me, keep me honest here.
That's correct.
The funds that did decide to overcome our objections to a risky early stage deal and jump into SightBox. It happened to be a really good exit for us. And so, you know, now we look back and of course we're so glad we did. But it's, I think, helpful for entrepreneurs to know the mindset of investors. You know, they're not just having to de-risk a deal or understand the risks, but then they're also having to make a non-obvious move, or they're just not going to make a big enough bank on the deal if it wins.
Okay, great, thank you. So Travis, you mentioned what your biggest challenges were when looking for funding. So how many times did you pitch to investors before receiving funding? If you don't mind sharing that.
No, I don't mind at all. I'm assuming that Tom and Angela will forgive me for being honest here, but it was a bumpy process initially. You know, I mean, it's trying to get investors, like Angela said, to jump in. You know, it's really hard, I think, and Angela, you can correct me if I'm reading this wrong, but what I've learned is that investors don't want to be alone in a deal. It's too risky, it's too scary. They want to know they've got other people that see what they see and that are in it together. It really helps the deal get some momentum. And so, you know, back to the difficulty of getting to that spot. I think I had, and I give Tom Sperry static about this all the time from Rogue, I think I had 7 rescheduled meetings with him, if I remember right, trying to get a meeting to have a conversation. And, you know, that wasn't abnormal. You know, that's not something that I didn't also experience, but this was early. And I was like, gosh, what's the deal with these investors? I can't get any of them to just commit to a meeting. And it's because they're being pulled in a gazillion directions, because everybody's got the greatest, most amazing, groundbreaking thing. And somehow you got to break through all that noise. And I pitched before we sold. I think last I checked, I think I pitched to 105 investors, you know, with a mix of angels and funds across the country. And in the end, I think we had a total of around 30 angels and investors. So if you do the math on that, that's a lot of no's. A lot of people telling you your idea is terrible. This isn't going to work. I just don't get it. I don't see how this is, you know, has great market adaptation. You know, there's all kinds of reasons. And then there's also the yeah, we like the idea, keep us in the loop. And those are hard to read. It's, you know, I've also found it's hard for investors to say no. They want to watch and they want to keep an eye on it, but they're not quite there yet. And that can drag on for a long time. So just, I guess the bottom line is don't give up and don't let them break your spirits. If you really believe in what you're doing, just stick with it, and eventually they will appreciate your tenacity. And if you're climbing and continue pushing and keep them informed, eventually I've had some come back and say, okay, we'd like to talk again. And, 4 months later, 5 months later, a year later. So.
All right, good to know. Good advice. Question for Angela. How can early stage digital health companies best attract the interest of investors? You mentioned capital efficiency. Anything else?
Yeah, let me give a few tips. You can always act like a much bigger, better funded company than you are. And in fact, that can be really good practice. So these kind of updates that Travis just referred to, I really like to see, even if you have 0 investors yet, I like to see CEOs start to collect an interest list. What that looks like is, you can BCC names. Maybe in the beginning you only have 3 names on it. And there's a lot of online good examples of what an investor update looks like. You can pull one of the examples and put a discipline around, say maybe every 2 months when you start, around sending out an investor or interested friends of list. And there's maybe 6 kinds of things you should report on. One is around product development. One is around customers. So even if you don't have a product yet, you can still have practice customers in the form of pilots, surveys, conversations that you're documenting, etc. And if you are fundraising, an update on funding. If you have a team and you're building a team, update on team. Those are some of the buckets. I also encourage you to be transparent about challenges and opportunities. Remember, investors, not everyone gets into this. Most good investors have a risk appetite. They do not expect everything to go well. But they don't like to find out that things were bad and you didn't tell them either. So if you get in this discipline of creating this little monthly rap sheet or 2 month and sending it out, you'll find as you're out talking to people, your list will grow and you'll hone how you do it. And I'll tell you, they used to say with physical newsletters, right, where we used to get a lot more of those in the mail, to nonprofits, they would say the actual job of your newsletter, anyone's not going to read it. They get it and they say, yep, they're still in business, and then they recycle it. It's kind of like that with your investor update. I may not read it, but I see it and I notice that you're still around, still slugging away. You'll almost never get a response to those, but know that they're important because it builds this memory that something's happening. So I would do that. This is, again, advice for someone who has nothing. Okay, how do you start to build it? If you are fortunate enough to be able to bootstrap using your own, that means using your own funds or your team's funds, I recommend that because the chances you're going to get further before you actually need someone else's money are greater. I also think having a team is really important. It's not ever enough to just have one person. You're going to need more people. And partly, it's not just people that you would hire or agencies that you would contract for at retail value. You are the Pied Piper of your company. You need to be able to convince people to buy stuff before it's actually done, join your team before there's any money or much money to give them, and work harder than they've ever worked for nothing or little. And that's the early days. And it's not for everyone. And frankly, if you aren't able to do that for multiple years, really prepared to skinny down your cash needs, I think it may not be the road for somebody. And sometimes I worry we glorify entrepreneurship so much that everyone thinks they need to be an entrepreneur. It's not for everybody. And it comes with great sacrifices and risks as well. So I like to know that people have had that conversation with themselves and the team has had that conversation because they're in for a long ride, whether they want to be or not.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. Travis, this next question is for you. Johnson & Johnson purchased SightBox, and when it was sold to them, what changed for the better and what changed for the worse?
Sure, yeah, this is always the big unknown when you're going down this path of what happens after that happens. And there was definitely some great things that came with that. Obviously, number one, I didn't have to go try to raise money anymore, which freed up my time to focus more on the business. And honestly, the resources that companies like that have available to you that you get to leverage now to make bigger things happen. And there were a lot of conversations that evolved that I'm not sure I could have made evolve, on my own, that they were able to, put some muscle behind. And then there were also things that were very frustrating, as a startup and as a lifelong entrepreneur. I mean, I was used to making decisions right now and we go. Not a lot of analysis going on. Decisions had a lot of gut as well as data, but you just ran with it because you knew you could switch gears if it didn't work. And I've also never worked for a big company before. I've always worked for myself, so that was a big culture shock to me about the speed at which you can move. So that was probably another negative, as I had to slow my roll a little bit, and was let know. I was told a few times that I needed to just take it down a notch, and there are processes that we have to go through. So that took some getting used to, but I managed, and I had a 2.5 year period of time that in my contract that I needed to work with J&J, and I was actually enjoying myself a majority of the time, and learning how to adapt a startup inside of a $350 billion global organization was very interesting experience.
Yeah, that's great. Okay. So Angela, the next question is for you. How has digital health changed in Portland and in the state of Oregon in the past 5 years, and what trends are you seeing?
Well, for one, I think Portland Seed Fund, by the way, we are the most active investor in Oregon. So you could almost view our deal flow as somewhat of a index traded fund or ETF, indexing a slice of the local deal flow, right? So back in 2010-11, when we launched Fund 1, we had 0 digital health companies in the portfolio, picking up steam in Fund 2, which was kind of the next 4 year period, to right now in Fund 3, where we are actively investing, and we have, it's probably about 20, I think we're probably 25% in health. It's not all exactly digital health, but it's significant. So that's what's changing. More talent is pursuing these ideas with more success. I think that technology itself makes it easier for digital health to blossom, right? We have an ecosystem development happening as well. We're early in the stages, I think, of the funding that's coming in through OHSU and the Knight Cancer Center to deploy $1 billion in the ecosystem. That's going to change our very infrastructure. And as you well know, with OBI and OTRADI, PSBA, OHSU, all down in that South Waterfront area, going to be very important assets in, making more robust this ecosystem that will incubate and nurture and launch digital health companies, along with medical device and therapeutics and diagnostics and all of that. But it's slower to build, I believe, the digital health landscape or ecosystem than it was the tech ecosystem. But we did that on a shoestring, very Portland style. And I think that's also the way we're doing it with the digital health ecosystem. We do have, any number of players entering the market. I think, Travis was modest to not mention that it was a really big deal to get Johnson & Johnson looking at his company. Okay, Johnson & Johnson, okay, even in the Northwest at all, Pacific Northwest, Seattle, we think of Seattle as a health capital. They have never done an acquisition anywhere in the Northwest. So to think that it takes, it's kind of a David and Goliath story. a little guy company to attract the attention of this big giant and bring them into the landscape and see, wow, I liked this deal, but I also might like other things about this ecosystem. And now you're on my radar, and maybe I'll be an acquirer or a partner in some other deals too. That was a huge add to the ecosystem. So more talent, more deal flow, improved, enhanced ecosystem, and money, abundant sources, coming down in the night gift and others that will continue to embellish and improve the workforce attraction and the actual resources, assets that we need to bust this out.
Great, thank you for that, all that good information. Travis, so changing direction a little bit, you recently had a personal experience with COVID-19. Would you tell us about that and what how it's going for you?
Yeah, so back on April 1st, I tested positive for COVID-19, and I had it the week prior, but testing was difficult at that point in time to get a test. And so I finally was able to make that happen through some phone calls and being my normal startup self, pushing, trying to find a way in. And so finally got tested, came back positive, and the whole experience of having it was, I don't want to minimize it. It wasn't bad for me, but that's, I know it varies by individual. But it was very interesting to watch what was being said, on the media and through other people and articles that I was reading, and then be living in it at the same time. And, being concerned for my family, and are they going to get this from me, and what's going to happen to them? Does my wife, is she at risk? I don't know. There's so many people that have underlying health issues that they don't know about, which has become a huge part of this whole thing. It's that thing that where people aren't taking care of themselves until something is wrong. The problem is there's a whole bunch of information that they could have been gathering if they would have been doing some just proactive screening and monitoring of their body over the years, that when the thing comes that shocks their body, at least they have some information to show how they got there. And so all of this has actually helped evolve a new venture that I'm now starting because I can't help myself. My wife is asking why, and I say because I don't know what to do with my brain. I have to do something, and so and it involves an idea similar to SightBox, but on a bigger scale, where people are able to manage their own personal health from home and monitor and screen their own bodies whenever they'd like, without the complications of health insurance and doctor's visits and scheduling and missing work and all the things that people use as a reason to procrastinate until the bad thing happens and they wish they would have gone in a long time ago. So that's more to come on that. But yeah, the COVID-19 experience that I had really put an exclamation mark on this for me, on how important it is for us to start finding a way to help people be more proactive about their health and take care of themselves rather than relying on the medical profession to do it for them.
Well, we're very glad that you're doing well, and that the rest
and
of your family
is fine as well.
Yeah.
They all tested negative. They didn't get it from me, so that's good.
That's wonderful news. So Angela, the next question is for you. What opportunities does COVID-19 present for investors and the future of digital health in Portland?
Well, a lot of that entrepreneurial muscle and agile pivot ability that Travis has in spades and referenced is also evident in other companies in our portfolio, as you could imagine. We've got, I think, no fewer than 5 companies who are currently engaged in COVID pivots. And they are primarily health companies doing this, but there's also companies engaged in manufacturing PPE. I know we've all read stories of different cut and sew operations that have been put on mass production, 3D printers put on screen. I'm not using the right word, but yeah, 3D production or 3D printer armies producing the shields. There we go, shields. We also have a company engaged in a very specific contract related to a higher level of PPE production with higher specs. So this has all happened, as you know, in a very short time. I think the opportunity for digital health is, everybody's trying to chase some version of being better prepared for a situation like COVID-19. So I would say there's infinite opportunity. I love that Travis has a great opportunity that was already a good one without COVID-19, but this is where many companies find they are. It was already a good idea, but this puts an exclamation point on it, to steal his word. That sounds to me like something I'd be very interested in talking to Travis about as soon as he's ready, but I understand he's now bootstrapping. So I guess he's following some advice that he might have gotten somewhere else throughout the process. But I'm bugging him like every couple of weeks. So are you ready for us to look at it now? How about now? How about now? So, and I will say to an investor, an exited entrepreneur is, it's a special thing. It's not easy. We know it's not easy. Not everyone is going to have a successful exit. In fact, most entrepreneurs will not. Many, we hope, have a modest exit, so they at least feel they got something for their time and effort, and investors as well. But a really strong exit doesn't happen that often. And when entrepreneurs get that for you, I think you definitely want to know what their next step is. So Travis did a great job making sure investors were well cared for through all the the entire process of SightBox. We don't forget that. For people who may not have that experience, what would you do to make your company more attractive or interesting in this era of COVID? For one, I would say don't make a false connection. Like, don't sort of use it as a way to pretend your company has a line in there, but there's really not. It may be better to just wait it out. There will be cycles of coming back to normal where, people don't want to talk about COVID-19 anymore. They want to do other things. So if you're not something that has that COVID star power, don't worry about it. Just ride it out. So we have one company who was in exactly that situation. It's a company called Pullover. It's not a digital health company, but I'd like to talk about it anyway, if it's okay.
Oh, yeah.
Their core thesis, again, super smart, young tech team, robotics, software, just everything. They were really excited about cars. And so they built this waterless, chemical-free car wash system, robotics, managed to get a strategic investor from the car wash industry, which was a big deal, managed to get a VC who's transportation focused, interested and lead around. So doing a great job. Then the sky falls, and guess what? No one cares about car washes or cars anymore, and including them. And they had a heart-to-heart with themselves to realize they had skills that they wanted to deploy in the service of the nation and the nation's health. And so they realized they had skills to deliver a ventilator, a mass casualty ventilator, to market quickly. And they set about that. And within the space of a month, they actually got a working prototype, a license to a medical device producer in the Willamette Valley. And now the tide has turned, and their market has had time to think about, where they want to go. And now they want to have those car wash conversations again. So that 1 month blip was enough to get them back on track. They now have something to demonstrate that they did. They got a license to a medical device company in a month. That's a unique team. So there are ways to use this time, even if it's not so direct.
Great, that's great. So Travis, we're gonna do a couple closing questions here. The first one is for you. If you were gonna give one piece of advice to early stage digital health startups in Oregon, what would it be?
Oh, wow. There's lots of pieces. How How about I'll highlight three things. I think number one for us, and this was a core value at SightBox. It'll be a core value at our new company. And it's just I think a way that you need to train yourself to think, and that is to value progress over perfection. And what I mean by that is, no matter what you build or what you do, no matter what you're creating, you're never going to nail it out of the box. It's never going to happen. There will be things that you're going to learn along the way that cause you to have to modify whatever your original plan was. And so trying to get it perfect, let's say you're working on something and you're, 2 months along, you could launch, it's a little rough, it's not perfect, it's got a few little hiccups, but you could start testing the market and start listening and learning about what you've built and what needs to change. Or you could spend twice as long getting it exactly the way you wanted and make it perfect. Well, you've just wasted a bunch of market validation time that you could have been doing, when inevitably you're going to end up having to do that anyways. And whatever you perfected, you're going to end up changing it. So I think it's really important to focus on getting things to the launching point so that you can start learning from real people. You can speculate all you want as the person building the thing on exactly how it should be. Which leads into my next thing, which is listen to your customers. Don't be bullheaded and try to tell them what they need. If you just get it out there, they'll start telling you. Just be ready to listen and start making lists because they're going to give you more feedback than you ever wanted. And you also have to learn how to filter it. Some of it is going to be ridiculous feedback, of course, but there will be good things that come out of that feedback. And you'll learn all kinds of stuff that make your product and your service better. And of course, I'm talking from a consumer-facing business, but I would assume the same applies in a B2B world. Those businesses are going to tell you what they need. And I think the third thing is, back to Angela's point about investors. A lot of people hear this, but I can't say how true it is, to make sure that the money you're taking money from investors that are going to be part of your team. Just because it's a check and it relieves some stress, it could end up being really not worth it. I've heard horror stories of people taking money and wishing they never had taken money from a person or a fund, because they've made their life miserable and they're of no help. Whenever they're struggling, the fund just kind of abandons them and moves on to other things that are working, instead of diving in and saying, here's a contact, call this person, or, hey, I reached out to this company, we're trying to set up a meeting so you can meet with them. That kind of stuff. Angela and her team did that. Rogue did that all the time, trying to make connections to help us. And that's super important, because you cannot do this on your own. You need that extra power in there, and those connections. So, and the other thing about investors is keep them informed. They want to know how you're doing, and putting out emails that are all unicorns and rainbows is not what they want. They want to hear what's wrong, and they want to know about it, and that's not a bad thing. Telling them, we tried this, it's not working. That's great, as long as you follow that up with, so here's what we've learned, and this is what we're going to do different. And here's how we're going to fix this. Because that builds trust and it builds faith that you can figure this out. And then when you go back and you say, hey, we need a little bit more money, we're running low on our runway, and I think we're going to get to here. If you never talk to them and all of a sudden you come asking for more money, that's going to be a hard sell. But if you've been talking to them and keeping them informed, when you need more, they're, Angela, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it builds some common trust that they know that you're not just wasting it, that you are actually trying and doing things that are making progress.
I 100% agree with you. Yes.
Great, thank you. That was great advice. And so Angela, on the same note, if you're going to give advice to early stage digital health startups in Oregon that are looking for investment, what would that advice be?
So I feel like I've been dispensing a lot of advice along the way. So rather than repeat what I've been saying, I want to focus on a couple of different things. One is It's very important to be part of a community of peers who understand what you're going through. And we're fortunate enough in Oregon to have, several options, and just, within our own backyard, right? Within, half a mile of one another, we have both OBI. You guys do a great job with companies, and Portland State Business Accelerator, who also does a great job with companies. In fact, I know there's a lot of shared programming, great relationship there. It is a tough job to be an entrepreneur, and sometimes you just need a shoulder to cry on, whether that's actual tears or figurative, doesn't matter. There are times where you're going to feel like you want that, and not being alone is really important. So as the company progresses, you may also seek a more vertically specific type of cohort or community. And we've had many companies, SightBox included, also NurseGrid, who at one point in their evolution was accepted into either a virtual or partially in person 90-day incubation program that was not in Portland. And they were able to make contacts very specific to their market and industry, do pivots that were more sophisticated that we as generalists could not have helped with. And I think that is probably part of the path of most digital health startups, that they need to get ready, that at some point in their evolution, they're probably going to have to look out of region, or maybe it's virtual these days. But some of the big medical capitals have different types of investors than we have here. And I like to see people create a range of investor relationships, not just angel and venture and strategic, but geographic. It's important to not just raise money in Oregon if you want to go to the moon. And to do that, you have to start forming relationships outside of Oregon. At the same time, it's really valuable to have local investors. So do you need to do it all? Unfortunately, I think you do.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you to both of you. We really, really appreciate your expertise and your hearing about your experiences. So we're going to open it up to questions from the audience. If you have a question for Angela or Travis, please send it in the chat. You can send it to me privately, or you can send it out to everyone. And I'm going to look through and see right now what we've got. The first question that we have is from Greg, and he is asking, what is the typical size of an investment by Portland Seed Fund? And I'm going to open his microphone if he's still here. Actually, yeah, he may have stepped out. What is the typical size of an investment by Portland Seed Fund?
So Portland Seed Fund will initially invest $50,000 typically. Occasionally we'll do $100,000, and very occasionally we'll do more than that. The reason isn't based on what you need. We all know you need more than $50,000, but it's about our strategy and how we play. What we do is, I'll call it persistent follow-on investing. And that's super valuable, because when you need cash and you're going to be out of money in 2 days, Travis could call us and we wanted to reinvest, and he didn't have to come and repitch us and, start from the beginning and wait for 3 months of due diligence. He had us, on the relationship and the trust built, he had us. And there were, I think, 6 times in total that we put money into SightBox. So we follow on, and that is part of, again, our model. I think in the case of SightBox, we got up to 175K invested is what I'm remembering.
Great, thank you. Question from Ted Hobbs to Travis. He asked, how did you develop your list of potential investors to pitch to?
Sure. There's multiple ways. I'll just talk about the ones that worked because some of them didn't. First of all, cold calling never works. That I learned very quickly. You have to get introductions, and those are sometimes hard, but possible. Using LinkedIn, using other people in the startup world that have raised money before, having existing investors make introductions to other investors that may not have invested. If you're going to do the cold call route, which I did end up doing a little bit of, So I shouldn't say it didn't all work, but it was definitely the smaller percentage. What Angela was just pointing out a minute ago, I think is super important, which is find investors that are in your market. Calling every investor out there is really a huge waste of your time and theirs, because they don't know your industry, they don't know your space, the due diligence process is going to be awful, and there's going to be a lot of kind of difficult conversations where you're trying to justify the market, not just your product. And so I think getting people involved that are familiar with your space, that have invested in other companies that are like you, those are, if you're going to make cold calls, those are the ones that you want to start with, I think, because they'll be the most willing to at least take a look, and the less difficult to have a conversation with, because at least they understand what you're trying to do, because it gets really hard when you're trying to explain both the industry and what you're trying to build. That's a hard conversation.
Yeah. Ted, is there anything else you wanted to add to your question? Okay, I'm going to mute him then. The next question is from Andrea Adamson, and she's asking, what would you say that having interest from a potential buyer like Johnson & Johnson would increase the interest of angels and VCs to fund development milestones? And what level of interest would there need to be? And does it matter if the buyer would be overseas?
Excellent questions. Is that okay if I take that one? And
yes.
Travis may want to add on. This is where 2020 hindsight sounds really valuable. At the stage that most investors, early stage investors, are investing, there's only ideas of who might like to buy something. Very rarely is it known. And even when things are known, they often fall apart. So there's a lot of ways in which acquisitions do and can go wrong. We didn't know that J&J was interested when we invested in SightBox. I'm sure Travis didn't either. Although I'm sure that we asked him and grilled him a little bit, as we typically will, what are some of the exit partners you would see? And give me some scenarios of why would they want it? What might they pay for it? What would they base the pricing on? Would it be, a revenue multiple? Would it be an EBITDA target? Or are they looking for team? Are they looking to, take your brand off the shelf and mothball it so that their product doesn't compete? Why would they buy it? And we never really expect, we want to hear their thinking process and get a feel for what could happen. We never hold anyone to, remember when you gave us that pitch 7 years ago and you said that SAP was going to buy your company and it didn't? Well, yeah, you're a liar. I mean, we don't do that. But I have invested in some companies where they had a credible, sometimes corporate investors will like to come on as investors first. And then over time they get to know the company, and then sometimes they like to buy the company. So it's obviously great to have that, but hardly anyone actually knows what's going to happen.
Okay. Yeah. Does it matter if the investor is overseas?
No, it doesn't matter, but it needs to be understood by all parties that conventions vary from market to market. And we've had recently 2 companies that just took on a major investment from a lead investor in Europe. And in both cases, I would say what might have taken 2 months in the US took 4 to 6 months. And it's because terms are different, styles of doing deals are different, and lawyers love to make it their own. So when you have a lawyer on each side of a deal, it's kind of an arms race. And it takes longer for deals to get done. And that happens for acquisitions too, probably especially. So definitely a possibility, but just understand and set your investors' expectations that this is a good buyer, but let's know it may take a little longer than we would like for that reason.
Okay.
I think if it's okay, I'd like to add a little bit to that, just from the entrepreneur side of things, because one of the things that also happens, that happened with us, well, first off, before I talk about Johnson & Johnson, when we first started, we had negotiated a 5-year agreement with a very strategic partner in the eye care world. They're a global company named Essilor, and we put together a deal with them first, and they were the company we thought would buy us, from my perspective. But what that did, I think, is it helped. You know, it was obviously no guarantee, like Angela said. Yes, that would be amazing if they came in, we became partners, and then we build the thing, and then they buy it. What a smooth, slick deal. But I think it's very rare that that's actually how everything goes. And so, but the validation of having them willing to sign an agreement like that to start working as a partner with us was critical in building that trust. And also the fact that there are other companies out there that are interested in what we're doing that are big. That says something. So I think looking for those opportunities can't hurt. And then when Johnson & Johnson came along, they actually, they were going to invest. We were having, all of our meetings were about them investing in our Series A round. There was no conversation about them buying anything. But what happened is, as the due diligence began and they started really understanding what we were doing and where we were, and then, you know, we got calls from Amazon was having conversations about what we're doing, and I started talking to them, and all of a sudden, you know, Johnson & Johnson said, okay, hold on a minute. Never mind, we changed our mind. We'd like to just buy you now, instead of investing in you and growing you and then buying you and having it cost more. So sometimes, and the purchase was all about a strategic opportunity for that. You know, they're a company that doesn't sell direct to consumers. They sell to retailers and distributors. And so their connectivity to the consumer directly is of huge value to them. And so that's what a lot of these bigger companies are looking for is, you know, the world is changing and the market is changing and customers now are buying direct. How do we get access to that? And that's what they saw in this, is that opportunity for them to have that direct communication.
Okay, great. Thank you. I have 2 more questions, and I know we're running a little bit late, but I'm going to try to get to these questions. But first, I'm going to put up a poll survey, another poll. Well, if I can get it to, okay, here it is. It's a post-program survey. If our attendees could answer this while the last couple of questions are going, I would appreciate that. Okay, so another question is, how important is it to secure trademark rights for a digital product, device, or idea before the actual pitch of the idea? Either of you.
Seems like more of a legal question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would talk to attorneys. Now, I can say a little bit from experience with the new business that I'm working on. We have, because of what we're doing, we've actually done a provisional patent back in October to kind of secure our place in this space. Now, those things they're not bulletproof, obviously, but it gives you the ability to at least put other companies on notice that you own this idea and you're building this and this is your thing. They're free to get in on the same space, but there could be conflict down the road. You know, that's really, I think, all you're doing with that. But one of the things our attorneys have been advising us is we're not supposed to talk about anything beyond the patent, provisional patent registration. So talking about only what's in that written document, anything beyond that, having people sign NDAs. Now, investors won't sign NDAs because they're talking to too many companies and they just can't do that. But partners and other relationships that you're working with, it is a good idea to just protect. If you've got something that's unique, it's a good idea to try to protect yourself, I think, as best as you can. But you do need to do it once you talk about it. From what our attorneys are telling us, again, I'm not a lawyer, but what our attorneys are saying to us is don't talk about these things that you're doing because they're not in the provisional patent that you filed, and therefore they become public domain and or not public domain, but publicly introduced, which now voids any ability to file a patent.
Okay, great. Okay, we have one final question. It's from Charles Ma. He's asking, what kinds of innovations and industries does the ecosystem in Oregon have the best fit?
I can take a stab at that and try to keep it quick in the understanding that we're pretty much out of time. I believe our strength is in the mashup of a variety of disciplines. So interdisciplinarity. So where health collides with the incredible creative industry that we have here, where you know, we have a major open source movement here, where that collides with perhaps specific vertical knowledge. So to me, one of the reasons I love what I do is it feels like a treasure hunt. What's true today was not true a year ago. What's true tomorrow? I don't know, but I look forward to discovering it. I think one of the hugest opportunities for disruption innovation is some form of return to local supply chain. All matters supply chain are really going to be top of mind. And I know that's not maybe specifically health related, but that's good homework for everyone to go home and whatever it is you're thinking about, think through your supply chain. Is there a way to make it local and independent and to have contingency plans? Because this is a lot of the issue we find ourselves in, and everyone's rethinking their supply chain.
That's a very good point. Very good point. Well, to the both of you, thank you so much for your time and your expertise and your information in doing this Lunch and Learn today. And thank you for agreeing to do it virtually rather than in person like we originally had planned. We really appreciate your help here. And so thank you to everybody for attending. We're so glad you are here. I will be sending out a link to the recording afterward. Look for it either later this afternoon or tomorrow, and I will email it to you, and then you can listen to it over again and take notes as you see fit. And I really appreciate everybody's time, and have a great rest of your week.
Thanks, Renee.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much, Renee.
Bye.
Bye, Travis. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Go
Thanks
busy
so
on that
much.
startup.
Yes. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.